Hey everyone! Welcome to the review for Vaporum Lockdown. We recently beat the game, and something new I've been trying out over the course of 2020 was reviewing the games that I've played as I beat them. Remember that there'll be a written version of all of this down below in the comments section in a pinned comment from me in case you want to read about the review after I've given it, or before I've given it, or instead of listening to me talk about it. I generally like reviewing the games after I have either beaten them entirely, or until I've encountered bugs or glitches that either prevent me from beating the game or make me not want to play it any longer. As in either case, I can probably give a good idea of what the game was about, and the various aspects of it I'd liked or disliked. So the first thing that we'll talk about, as I often do for all these games, is the game's graphics. And Vaporum is a very pretty game. It's just as gorgeous as the first one, which is to say, looks great. The levels feel like they take place in the cold mechanical tower. The rats and insects look mutated and fearsome. The gears twist and turn appropriately. The doors we're seeing, they look great. The pipes feel appropriate. The robotic enemies feel apathetic and uncaring. The numerous wooden boxes as well that you're going to be moving and destroying all out the Vaporum Tower also look good too. So I think the game's going to get a perfect 3 out of 3 here from me for graphics. It looks amazing. For the sound is spot on. The doors sound fantastic. The clicks from button presses, pressure plates being depressed, or switches thrown, lasers, levers, and the echoes of the insects chirping are all, they're great. Absolutely great. The hammers, swords, and gadgets and shield blocks sound wonderful. I can't think of anything that would need improving here. Perfect 2 of 2 for me when it comes to the sound. For the music is thematic, although there is very little of it. Or rather, I mean, every single stage has music, so it's not like it has it in some places, doesn't have it in others. But I can't think of too much where it really stood out. It's not inappropriate, which is great. But it's one of those games where you're glad there's the thematic, eerie music playing, but there's nothing, I guess, that really makes it stand out compared to any of the other games I have played. So I'm going to give it a 1 out of 0 through 2 from me here. And it's not because it's bad, but because there's other large contenders whose music is, well, more memorable than this one's. It's not bad in any way. It's just, I can't think of anything that stood out. In the first Vaporum, there was 1 or 2 battle themes that really stood out to me. The final boss battle, and the one just before that, where you fought a series of golems and shotgunners and other enemies in a large arena. And yeah, that was amazing in the first game. But I'm not reviewing the first game, I'm reviewing this one. So on a score of 0 through 2, the music will get a 1. For the story, I thought the story was decent enough. The voice acting for it is delivered very well, and I loved reading the thoughts of our antagonists from the first one. So I was glad to see it carried over to this one too. I really enjoyed getting the thought processes of our foes, and it's not done too often in the games that I've played, especially not to the extent that it is in the Vaporum series. I really like that they've done this. You get to see or hear or read about Laura Reich's eventual, her excuses and the way that Fumium was becoming an obsession with her, which is what that strange substance does to anyone who apparently works with it, or the vast majority of the people. The tower felt more flushed out this time too, rather than just a series of thematic levels. We had to kind of walk back and forth between them. That interconnectivity between the levels felt right. It made the tower seem like there was actually experiments going on in here, rather than just an obstacle course for us to do, although the levels all did contain their own obstacle courses. I did like, in particular, the substance field analyst desperately trying to warn people that Fumium might have influence over their thoughts, and warning that more research needs to be done in that area. I liked Harlan's annoyance and rivalry with Laura Reich as well, and then their eventual working together because of the influence of the Fumium. It's hard not to give this game a 3 for its story, to be honest, but I can think of a few things that stop it from being a perfect story. In particular, how we know, based on the logs we read in this game, like, we know Fumium controls other people. We know that ingesting it or working with it has a chance of mutating us as well. And for some reason, however, our character believed that we could take a Fumium-powered sub and make sure our food, which is Fumium-enhanced Shaneberries, with us, while wearing a Fumium-powered suit, and that the Fumium would let us do this without there being any issues or trouble. But overall, I think the story itself was solid, so I'm going to give it a 2 out of 0 through 3. For the gameplay, this is where I'm going to try to remain detached from my disliking of the direction the series went this time. In particular, the way it moves around, flips switches, access buttons to rotate, flame turrets, so I can push a box into a pit to access another button. The first game was a grid-based combat game with occasional puzzles. And this game is a grid-based puzzle game with occasional combat. Although the skill trees feel more fleshed out and have slightly more variety, we don't get to use them as much, because most of the game involves puzzles instead. The puzzles are more complex than the first one on the whole, which is great if you like puzzling them out and enjoy that sort of thing. And the first time you're presented with them, it may take a bit of time to solve them. The combat itself is easier than the first game as well, thanks to the constant drop rate of the health kits this time around. We had 29 plus health kits at the end of the game, and the first one I think we maybe had 6. Overall, the game is far less punishing than the first one for combat, but much more so for puzzles. Less so for puzzles. I wanted the first game more than I wanted this one, after I had played it for about 4 or 5 hours or so. I wanted more close calls and less instant deaths or dead ends. That said, though, the game it's a solid game. You just need to realize that you're going into this... if I had known going into this game it was a puzzle game, not a combat game, my expectations would have been set a little differently. It's kind of like Bard's Tale 4, because Bard's Tale 4 had had combat. The combat was fun, but it also contained a lot of puzzles, more puzzles than combat. And so you had to kind of like that more than the combat, because that's what you were presented with more often. So overall, I think giving the game a 2 here for gameplay is appropriate, given that I suspect most people are like me with their expectations. My preferences would deem I give it a 1, but I can see many people still liking this game, even though it's a puzzle game, not a combat game. For the GUI and controls, the controls are absolutely solid, just like the first one. All the hotkeys are perfect, right at my fingertips. The game's timing is tight. I can't think of anything that needs improvement here. Solid 2 out of 2. For the grind, you can't actually grind in this game because the game doesn't let you. It doesn't respawn monsters. And when it comes to the grind, the point value in my point system, you don't gain points for being grindy, but you lose points for being grindy. So this game doesn't lose any points. It's not grindy at all. Feels perfect. And your choices matter. Like, you really want to build a appropriate character to take advantage of your spec without wasting too many points. So it requires some thought in that aspect as well, especially given that you can't kill creatures over and over again for the experience points. I suppose this makes it even more important to solve puzzles in the Fumium chambers up above, especially if you don't have the assault suit, given the amount of experience that there is in this game. For the bugs and frustration, you should know that I can or will dock many points for a game having bugs in it, depending upon the amount of frustration that I have with them. There were no bugs in Vaporum when I played through it. There were no glitches, no crashes, or anything of the like, so this game loses no points for bugs and frustration because of bugs. For the game's balance, while I'm sure the game's combat builds are balanced, the first game was perfect in that regard, I think there is something that annoys me to the point where I can't give the game a 2 here. Energy. There is zero reason not to do something else around your house while your character recharges their energy reserve between combats. In fact, this was a problem I thought existed with the first game as well. Technically, given the amount of puzzles and how long it can take to solve them, you'll probably recharge while completing the next one before you get involved in the next brief combat. That said, though, this time around, I'm thinking of giving the game's balance a 1 of 2 here. Because the game's balance is a bit off. It's not from your character's skill tree perspective, but from a pacing perspective. I think there are too many puzzles laid before the player too quickly. You get too many of them in a row, and they needed to, I feel, well, they don't need to do anything, but I kind of wished that there was a longer pause between the puzzles. It would be like playing an FPS game that also had a bunch of story stuff in it. And the FPSing took maybe, I don't know, let's say it took like 6 minutes to do, and then you had 30 minutes of talking. And it did this consistently. It would seem like the pacing is off because you would want to balance them between the two. And I just didn't feel that in the Vaporum Lockdown compared to the first one. So the game's gonna get a 1 out of 2 here for balance. And again, it's a bit weird because it's not due to the different balancing act between the different types of character builds or Fumium suits or pieces of equipment that you find. It's mostly because of the pacing of the combat versus puzzling. For my thumb on the scale, this is where my biases come into play here. I try to account for them with this score. I did like the game despite all my complaining in it, but I also needed to take breaks because of all these puzzles. Did I mention the puzzles yet in the review? Because there's a lot of puzzles in this game. I'm super glad to have played Vaporum Lockdown, and I will totally play the next one if this company makes... I forget the name of the company now, but if they make another Vaporum Lockdown, that's going to be an instant buy, day one buy for me. I really like the series. I like the voice acting in it. I like the world setting they have. I think the combat is very tight and what have you. However, aside from what we're watching right now, which is the backdrop for this review, I'm probably never going to play Vaporum Lockdown again. And that has nothing to do with it being a bad game. It's just, I don't want to spend another 8 hours solving puzzles in an, 11 or 12-hour game. I just don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it. Maybe sometime way in the future, when I'm in the mood to play both of these Vaporum games, like this one first and then the second one next, maybe I'd fire this game up again, but I can't see myself doing it anytime soon. And again, it's, as I've said many times now, it's all due to the puzzles. Alright, and as for the awesome ending, I'm torn between giving this a 1 here, so you can earn 1 point here. Oh, and I'm sorry, for my thumb on the scale, it's going to earn 1 out of 2 points there. I did like the game. I don't regret playing it. I think if it's a good buy, you'll see based on my score that it ranks highly with me. It's just, darn it, it's not a game that has any replay... Well, it has some replayability, obviously, because you can play the game with a different character build and what have you, but I'm probably never going to play through the game again, or maybe one time I'll play through Vaporum Lockdown again, but it takes too long. Puzzles just take too long. I'd print out like a guide and have it right next to me so I could just instantly solve the puzzles this time around. And even then, many of them can't be instantly solved. It requires a lot of timing or waiting for certain things to reach a certain point in their activation, or navigating a maze where something's moving around the maze with you. You have to wait for it to reach a certain part. So they take time, and I just probably won't happen very often. So it gets a 1 out of 2 on my thumb on the scale. So back to the awesome ending. So you can earn 1 point here if your ending is awesome, and I'm really torn between giving this the 1 point because it has an appropriate ending for the lore of what is happening in the tower here, the Arx Vaporum, and also because I really like bad endings. But I'm going to give it a 0 out of so it's a 0 or 1, so it gets a point or it doesn't. And so I wanted something just slightly different. The first Vaporum, if I had been reviewing that one, would totally have earned this point, because that ending was not something I expected. I expected us to leave with our daughter, and that ending was amazing. That was a very nice twist that I very much liked. Here, though, the reason why it's not going to get the 1 point for the awesome ending is, even though I feel it's appropriate, I really think that Ellie strikes me as being a smart girl. She's look at all the puzzles she solved. However, she should have known what was waiting for her at the end. And the fact that she still went through with her plan, I mean, I guess it was the only plan she had, no matter what. Like, if your option is, we gotta escape the Arx, this is the only way to do it, sure. But it seemed like she was totally surprised by the ending, and I wasn't at all. I expected this to be the case. And even if we hadn't beaten the first Vaporum to discover what Fumium is capable of due to it, we did read all the texts here in this one, so we knew what the eventual outcome was going to be, that the Fumium was not going to let us go so easily. So, I don't know. I think the ending's a good ending. It's just, I wish they wormed in a different, I don't know. If we figured it out, I really feel like Ellie should have figured out what was going to happen as well. So, that's it. Speaking of that's it, that's also it for the review, everyone. So, on a scale of 0 through 20, Vaporum Lockdown gets a 14 from me. Despite all my gripes with the game and its pacing, I really enjoyed it. It's a great game, but you have to like grid puzzle games. It's worth a playthrough, although it may be the only one that it gets from you, since the puzzles do take so long to solve and make up most of the gameplay this time around. The story fleshes the world out a bit more now, too, introduces a new heroine to the world who may also not see the brave new world she helped create, or maybe she'll join the bad guys. It looks great. It's a worthy successor of the first game, but again, you must be in the mood for the gameplay changes it does from the first. I would recommend the first game as well if you ever find both of these on sale at the same time, and you can see how different they are and judge which one you prefer for yourself. Alright everyone, and that sums it up. Thank you guys for listening to the review, and hopefully I will see you in the next game, whatever that is. Take care everyone.